Hi folks, welcome back to American Literature 1. We're going to be discussing the famous abolitionist writer, Mr. Frederick Douglass. So let's get to it. Now, this is a portrait of Frederick Douglass. Oftentimes you see the older portrait, but I like this one. It captures his intensity and his strength. The older ones do too, but I really like this one. Abolitionist leader Frederick Douglass was born into slavery sometime around 1818 in Talbot County, Maryland. He became one of the most famous intellectuals of his time, advising presidents and lecturing to thousands on a range of causes, including women's rights, the Irish Home Rule. Among Douglass's writings, there are several autobiographies eloquently describing his experiences in slavery and his life after the Civil War, including the well-known work narrative The Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. He died on February 20th, 1895. Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey was born into slavery in Talbot County, Maryland, around 1818. The exact year and date of Douglass's birth are unknown, though later in life he chose to celebrate it on February 14th. Douglass initially lived with his maternal grandmother, Betty Bailey. At a young age, Douglass was selected to live in the home of the plantation owners, one of whom may have been his father. His mother, an intermittent presence in his life, died when he was around 10. It was through reading that Douglass's ideological opposition to slavery began to take shape. Now think about that for a second. He didn't know anything. He didn't know any other state of being. So it was through reading that he began to look at this as an evil and something to be opposed. See, reading is fundamental. He read newspapers avidly and sought out political writing and literature as much as possible in the later years. Douglass credited the Columbian Orator with clarifying and defining his views on human rights. That is a series of speeches and talks made by famous people. Anyway, Douglass shared his newfound knowledge with other enslaved people. He hired out to William Freeland, and he taught other slaves on the plantation to read the New Testament at weekly church service. Interest was so great that in any week, more than 40 slaves would attend lessons. Although Freeland did not interfere with the lessons, the other local slave owners were a little less than understanding. Armed with clubs and stones, they dispersed the congregation permanently. And the problem there, the reason for that, you have slaves who can read, you have slaves who can understand that this is not a natural state, that there is the possibility of freedom, and that there's an inequality going on here too, particularly if you're reading works like the Bible, which are seemingly innocuous, but then it tells us things about the equality of all men in God's sight. Okay. Douglass tried to escape from slavery twice before he succeeded. He was assisted in his final attempt by Ann M. Murray, a free black woman in Baltimore, with whom Douglass had fallen in love. On September 3rd, 1838, Douglass boarded a train to Havre de Grace, Maryland. Murray had provided him with some of her savings and a sailor's uniform. He carried identification papers obtained from a black sailor. And Douglass made his way to a safe house of abolitionist Davis Ruggles in New York in less than 24 hours. Once he arrived, Douglass sent for Murray to meet him in New York. They married on September 15th, 1838, adopting the married name of Johnson to disguise Douglass's identity. Anna and Frederick settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts, excuse me, which had a thriving black community. There they adopted Douglass as their married name. Frederick Douglass joined a black church and regularly attended abolitionist meetings. He also subscribed to William Lloyd Garrison's weekly journal, The Liberator. Eventually, Douglass was asked to tell a story at abolitionist meetings, after which he became a regular anti-slavery lecturer. Garrison was impressed with Douglass's strength and rhetorical skill, and wrote of him in The Liberator. Several days after the story ran, Douglass delivered his first speech at the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society's annual convention in Nantucket. Crowds were not always hospitable to Douglass. While participating in an 1843 lecture tour through the Midwest, Douglass was chased and beaten by an angry mob before being rescued by a local Quaker family. At the urging of Garrison, Douglass wrote and published his first autobiography, a narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, in 1845. The book was a bestseller in the United States and was translated into several European languages. Although the work garnered Douglass many fans, some critics expressed doubt that a former slave with no formal education could produce such elegant prose. And you know from your reading, he is extremely well spoken, extremely well written. He writes better than most of us do today with our education. And the thing was, he was self-taught, right? No one sat down with him and said, okay, this is these are ABCs and this is how to read. No, he learned it and he figured it out himself. So if you take nothing else away from this, I want you to understand what a magnificent and marvelous figure this guy was, and how even in the throes of adversity, he managed to achieve a measure of greatness through education, the importance of education. Anyway, Douglass published three versions of his autobiography in his lifetime, revising and expanding on his work each time. My Bondage and My Freedom appeared in 1855. In 1881, Douglass published The Life and Times of Frederick Douglass, which he revised in 1892. Remember, this is 3 years before his death. Following the publication of his autobiography, Douglass traveled overseas to evade recapture. He set sail for Liverpool on August 16, 1845, and eventually arrived in Ireland as the potato famine was beginning. He remained in Ireland and Britain for 2 years, speaking to large crowds on the evils of slavery. During this time, Douglass's British supporters gathered funds to purchase his legal freedom. In 1847, the famed writer, in order to return to the U.S. a free man. Upon his return, Douglass produced some abolitionist newspapers: the North Star, Frederick Douglass Weekly, Frederick Douglass Paper, Douglass's Monthly, and New National Era. The motto of the North Star was, right is of no sex, truth is of no color, God is the Father of us all, and we are all brethren. In addition to abolition, Douglass became an outspoken supporter of women's rights. In 1848, he was the only African American to attend the first Women's Rights Convention at Seneca Falls, New York. Elizabeth Cady Stanton asked the Assembly to pass a resolution stating the goal of women's suffrage. Many attendees opposed the idea. Douglass stood and spoke eloquently in favor, arguing that he could not accept the right to vote as a black man if women could not also claim that right. The resolution passed. Yet, Douglass would later come into conflict with women's rights activists for supporting the 15th Amendment, which banned suffrage discrimination based on race, excuse me, while upholding sex-based restrictions. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the biography, the brief bio and background information of Mr. Frederick Douglass. As you've read in the text, he is an incredibly eloquent man, a fiery, powerful speaker, and probably one of the most eloquent people we will read this semester. And he did it all on his own. He was self-taught. Right? So, hopefully that gives you a sense of the man and his work. I will see you in the next video.